Ssanyu, you're a storyteller, a healer, a social innovator who brings together ancestral wisdom, spiritual practice, and narrative medicine in really powerful ways. You're the founder of Narrative Bridge, a consulting platform that brings narrative practice into healthcare, education, and corporate spaces. So it's really a pleasure to have you with us to explore what it means to heal as a whole person in a fragmented world. And one of the things that really interested me in your work and you is the idea that the body has the innate ability to heal itself. And your approach to healing, you've integrated a number of Western and non-Western healthcare practices. So, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you became a healer and how do you integrate all these different approaches to healing?
So the story I'll tell is my first experience of feeling something larger around me. Um, and when I say that larger around me, the feeling that I was really held. Um, I've gone through different iterations of illness, not being able to be diagnosed, and I know for individuals who continuously may not feel well, have experiences of going to the doctors and not really feeling held and supported. So there is an experience that I had where I was really guided to attune to my my body, to really pay attention to my thoughts. And it all began as a child. I was a home birth. My mother at the time, when she was pregnant with me, was a practicing Christian Scientist. And I had the experience of really understanding the tenets of the mind, body, spirit. So as I got older and I've had experiences where I was unable to move my hand, my right arm, I was paralyzed for several months. I was introduced to a prophet from West Africa, and it illuminated a lot of the practices that I had embedded inside of me and what I would say lay dormant. And that experience led me to ask the questions of my father, who's the chief of the bone healers. What what is this? And the this meaning the experiences that I was having through dreams, through intuition, through just listening that really illuminated inside of me that there is something larger around me that I was attuning to, that I have been always attuning to. So I would say my mother was my first guide. And as I've gotten older, the guides keep showing up. And when I ask the question, and I believe there's that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Right.
I had those experiences through this prophet, through my father. Um, but yet the foundation was always laid by my mother. And it allowed me to experience through teachings, through listening, through going back to Uganda. My father is Ugandan, and I've had the experience, the given this beautiful life of mine to live on the continent of Africa. And I was able to witness different practices of healing, not just in Uganda, but in Kenya and Ethiopia. And I got curious. And you said, I do believe we are all healers. We are all healers. We all have the ability to self-heal. And what I am charged to do in this world is to bring the stories of indigenous teachings and healings to intersect with the Western science and doctoring that we have. Because what I have witnessed is when these two meet, when they come together like this, the community, individual, society are healthier. You are given an opportunity, and meaning you, we all are given an opportunity to deeply listen to others who have the knowledge and wisdom from time immemorial. And when I say I'm integrating integrating practices, these practices come from the continent of Africa. They have just spread across the globe and have evolved into different types of offerings. I will use the example of Reiki. That is a practice, an energy practice of attuning to one's body and spirit. The story behind that, well, there's an intersectionality of this knowledge and wisdom that comes from the continent of Africa. We all know too that we as humans come from the continent of Africa. So there is this this mosaic that is being created of different shapes and colors of who we are, where we come from, cultures that make this world that we live in a very potent area for us to investigate. And when we start to investigate this area, which are stories, I believe that we embolden ourselves as individuals and we create healthier communities. So part of that is a spiritual practice. Well, a spiritual practice can be something as simple as I have my window open, looking out the window and just being still with the nature around us. Or it could be even ritualized. And that ritual of staring out the window and having this moment of quiet is something that is very powerful, that begins to literally change the neurons and protons within our brain. And when those things happen within our brain, it starts to signal into our body, into our blood, into our bones, that there is peace to be had, the stillness that is there within our ability to be present with ourselves is healing. And so we are charged, especially in this Western world, to go, 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 to move very quickly, to work hard, to charge forward. And that really disconnects us from nature, from nurture, from what I call the pause. I'm thinking of a saying my mother would tell us and, made us memorize as children, especially when we weren't feeling so well. Like I shared with you, my mother was a practicing Christian Scientist. I allowed myself to explore different religions as a young person and a young adult. I was a born again Christian when I was 13 years old. I was part of the Pentecostal church in Mombasa, Kenya. I studied Buddhism, Taoism. I really understood how to integrate stillness into my practice from the time that my mom would share with us and my sisters to repeat constantly and consistently when we weren't feeling well, peace be still, peace be still. I let go and let God. God is in us. That is what I know. I know that to be true because we are godly and we can use different words. We can say there is a greater energy, spirit, there is divine love. That's all God. So we're not separate from this understanding that there is a entity, a space around us and in us that really charge us forward to, quite frankly, get things done. And when we are steeped and rooted into this Western world of having to go, 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 we're disconnecting. I call it, we are not rooted or grounded in that peace be still, to let go, to let divine love come in, to let nature hold us and love us and support us. And part of what I know I'm here to share on this earth is the ability we all have to tap into this. And when we pay attention to the greats in the world or the people right now who are, I'm thinking of Tony Robbins or Brene Brown, um, Maya Angelou, um, just these people, these entities, I will say as well, who are seemingly doing well, right? They are out in the world. They all have a commonality, which is that they believe that they are great. And why do they believe they are great? There is something within them that is practice, and they discipline and ritualize this practice. And that practice is coming and being still within themselves to know when to, as I say, pause, to rest, to know when to listen, to know when to detach and rejuvenate and pour into themselves. The greats, Einstein, you know, that energy that Einstein shared with us that opened up into our ability to understand energy and how frequency works, that is all because he listened. He attuned to the universe around him. He attuned to nature. He understood how the trees speak to one another and they emit this gas that which speaks to other trees to say danger, danger. When that is something that we have disconnected ourselves from in this Western world, we're disconnecting from a very special place. And that's the heart. That's the frequency of listening. And when we deeply listen, so much happens, innovation happens. Um, the world becomes better. We become kinder to ourselves. And again, we create these healthier communities. So, how did I get here? I listened. I attuned to my ancestors and the elders who wanted to share their knowledge and wisdom with me. I do come from a lineage of shamans, of healers in Uganda. And I'm grateful for that because that just sort of emboldens me. It gives a levity within me to understand that there's a true connection that's beyond time and space, that which I come from. And we all come from something. And that's what I teach. I teach us to tap into our indigenous selves, to tap into the tongue. I often use my father's native language, Luganda, to facilitate information that really activates the soul, the divine being within us. So again, how did I come here? I also experienced loved ones dying at times that which were too soon. And I wanted to understand how the individual, the one who's left behind, can cope and use stories of their loved ones to heal. And because I was listening, I was guided to the narrative medicine master's in science program at Columbia University. And when I say guided, I literally was guided. I was consulting at a firm at a time that I was feeling stuck. And I was mourning the loss of my uncle, who was like a surrogate father to me. And I turned on the computer, and when I turned on, my browser, there was this banner that said Master's in Science in Narrative Medicine, Columbia University. And I was like, what is narrative medicine? And here I am. I've graduated and am now emboldened to teach the practice of narrative medicine on a global scale.
Yeah, one of the things that you talk about is really being open. You're constantly perhaps looking for teachers, looking for spiritual advisors. But one thing that you also mentioned that really is really hard in our culture today, as you're referencing, I think as you're saying, is this ability to be still and to be quiet. You started with the story of your mother in as a Christian Scientist. What did you learn from her?
To be still, to go within, um, to practice affirmations, to be kind, to practice forgiveness. And forgiveness is from within the heart. Um, to love oneself deeply, wholly, to love to travel, to experience new places, new cultures, um, to be a seeker. You know, you talked about I was, looking for teachers or mentors, spiritual teachers, what have you. I would actually reframe that and say I was open to receiving the leadership and the knowledge and wisdom from time that I was in my mother's belly. So again, it goes to that statement, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And oftentimes in my youth, I was learning the hard way. And the universe for the universe had given me experiences to teach me that it doesn't have to be hard. And I believe that's part of the reason why I was led to narrative medicine, is to teach me that my story matters, to teach me that death and dying is this cycle that we all will go through, and that there's something beautiful in understanding the death of a loved one, a death of maybe an old attitude or mindset, even of ourselves, to reckon with how cultures support families and communities through death, and that it's okay if it's not what you were experiencing in your own family, that can teach us something. And that's all come from my mother's wisdom of opening the world to us. She was one of the first Black American flight attendants for Pan American Airlines in the late 60s, early 70s. So she traveled the world, and she brought back to us the curiosity to be a part of a global society, to be a global citizen. And she taught us that with hard work and discipline, we can achieve many milestones. So I watched my mother achieve her PhD in education whilst she was a flight attendant. I watched her take care of her mother in our home, and watched and was present in the room when my grandmother passed away. I was 16. Before that, at 13, I watched my mother give birth to my youngest sister with no drugs. She wasn't screaming and hollering like movies show you. She was calm and collective, repeating affirmations and praying. So I experienced the life, death, life cycle by the time I was 16. So I believe that this has already been written for me, because by the time I got to the age of being at Columbia, which I was in my 30s, I was able to tap back into experiences and see how supportive certain people in my life have been during the life, death, life cycles. And I got curious. I wanted to know truly what happens to the caregiver when one is left behind. And honestly, mostly caregivers are family members. So I wanted to investigate what do I do now that my uncle has passed away, who was my rock. So it got me really interested in death and dying and palliative care. And so through that experience, I practiced becoming a death doula for almost 8 years. Um, and when my godmother passed away about 3 years ago now, I knew she was going to be the last person that I supported in this journey, because it was time for me to experience life. And I transitioned to becoming a birth and postpartum doula for women who are giving birth. I was a home birth, so I understood that there's something vital inside of me that wants to be a conduit, to be a support system to a woman who is giving life. And I say that I'm a multi-hyphenated individual because there's all these different aspects of me that make me who I am. And it really helps me to understand the narrative practice that I have been a part of my entire life. So whilst I am supporting women giving birth or families, you know, having their last moments with the loved one, or being with someone who is on their deathbed as a companion, as a support system, I too can go into the classroom and teach, and bring in the knowledge and wisdom that has been given me and that which I've also studied. I can also go into corporate America and speak to a C-suite individual or educator and share the importance of deep listening, because that's what we're talking about. We're deeply listening to ourselves and others, and that's a very clear pillar and tenet to the narrative medicine practice, along with attention and representation. And those three things of deep listening and bringing that in together create safe places. They create brave places. And so that has been part of the culture of attuning to story. And it's not something that we should take lightly, especially in this fractured world right now. We are given an opportunity to deepen our empathy. And that's what we are supposed to do, is to come together in difference and deeply listen to one another, to innovate and make deep change. And when that happens, not only do we feel motivated to continue to listen to others and create innovation, but we have motivated others as well because they have been a witness of us. And I am then being witness of them, accepting this change and difference as a positive. And that's what I believe we are supposed to do now in this fractured system, especially here in the United States and Africa and Europe. We all are experiencing our own fractured systems. My middle sister and I founded the Peace and Happiness Foundation.
Mhm.
Why? Because she knew how deeply I desired to work in our country, our home country. And at the time, I was interning at Harvard Medical School and understanding really what health disparities looked like, particularly in underserved communities. And when we started this foundation, it was to bring an awareness to our people around creating projects and systems that would bring safe water and maternal child health care to areas of the country, not just outside of the city, but inside of Kampala, and create systems to support those changes. And so when I started to travel amongst the country of Uganda and travel within the city of Kampala, these areas where you would say, oh my God, you would forget them, be like, oh, you know, it's dirty or they're not taking care of themselves. We have a big alcohol problem in Uganda. Oh, and it's not just like alcohol that you buy at the store. It's they make their own alcohol. So you're seeing families fractured. They don't deserve your help. Well, what I was noticing as I was traveling around the country, and at the time, um, I was supporting an initiative of the vice president's wife, Dr. Bukenya, to listen to the stories of these women who needed safe water to be able to give birth to a healthy child. And these women would come together and they would invite us into their homes, into their meetings, their, women's meetings, and they would talk about how they didn't fear that they weren't going to be taken care of. They didn't fear that they wouldn't have good births. They wanted to have better births. They didn't fear this circumstance that one would say it's detrimental to their life and their ability to create healthy families. So I noticed that there is an energy about them, literally. Um, they spoke with reverence and courage to say, we need help, but if you can't help us, we'll figure it out. And I started to really listen to these women's stories. And then my sister and I, we went up to the western part of Uganda, to the area of Gulu, where it was ravaged by civil war. And the men, young men and men of the homes, uh, if they weren't dead, they were out fighting. So it was a community essentially of women. And again, sitting, they invited us in their homes and listening to the stories where there was no fear. They were charged to find solutions, to feed their children. We saw that these women were picking up the shea nuts of the shea tree and selling them at the market and making this beautiful shea butter. And it's a species of shea butter, Nilotica shea butter, that is only found in Uganda along the Nile. And we started to understand that this work that they were doing within the community as women, as coming together, there is something potent about that that allowed them to see things from a positive and to use their own resources, literally the resources around them, to take care of themselves and their families. And what they wanted was to be listened to and to listen to what they needed. So I thought, okay, well, they need safe water. Well, no, they were saying, no, we need, you know, uh, the machines, the sewing machines, so we can make clothes for our children. We don't have to go into the city and buy clothes. They said they needed access to healthcare. So we were thinking, okay, doctors, and they needed to be heard and listened to, that there were healers within their village that they were also going to, whom they wanted the doctors to listen to as well, so they could feel supported in both areas. And so the healer in me was developed because I started to listen and wanted to, quite frankly, give back, find a way to embolden this group of women. And so my sister and I not only started the Peace and Happiness Foundation, we started to bring light to this beautiful shea butter. And so we brought shea butter into the US beauty market back in 2008 because we knew that if we brought light to these women's stories, the money that we were receiving and selling the shea would go back into the community and embolden these women to continue to tell their stories. And then that opened up a whole conversation that I was able to have with my father about our heritage and our lineage, and how there are shamans and these bone healers that come from our clan, and that there are clinics that practice bone healing practices to heal the bones, broken bones. So in many countries, we have what you see as, people on motorbikes. We call them boda bodas. Boda bodas, they're taxis, they deliver things. They come into the city and, there can be swarms of them. So accidents are a lot. Boda Bodas would rather go to the bone healer clinic, which is about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Kampala City, instead of to the hospitals, because the hospitals give you drugs, they wrap you up your broken bones and send you home. Whereby the clinic, they take you in. So it's the softness that you feel when someone takes you into their home, and they heal not the bones itself, but they're healing the heart, right? So you have people who are really attentive to these individuals. They use the traditional practices of certain herbs and bark, and the certain way that we wrap the bone for it to heal. Um, that really got me to think deeply about my ability as a healer, but then also how do we share this doctoring, indigenous doctoring, to the Western world? And so that really got me to deepen into asking questions, having my father tell me stories, um, show me where our clan comes from, where the bone healers come from, stories of the bone healers, stories of the Buganda kingdom, which is where the bone healers come from. And when one is open and vulnerable to, again, deeply listen to the other, you're just fed information that you just absorb. And because I'm a curious mind, I've always been curious since a child. I started to investigate. I started to play. I started to use my imagination as to what would it look like if this came to be a cohesive practice. And so I created what I call the Pause 3 practice, which is grounded in gratitude, intention, and forgiveness. And those are all things that I've learned as a child, right? And um, understood that it's deeply living within me, that when we practice this gratitude, a whole world opens up for us. Now, there's different language that one uses, and I think that's also a part of narrative practice that I learned, is that we have to understand the language. And so the language that I'm using here with you today is, broad in the sense of where I am rooted in my indigenous practice. However, when I go into different spaces, I attune to the language of the majority for the reason to be able to connect with them. And once they're connected with what I am here to share, I can then broaden out into that space that which I live in consistently and constantly. I want to share a story that my mom shared with me a few years ago, just a few years ago. She said when I was a little girl, I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. So I also have a very interesting childhood of being born in Newton, Massachusetts. We were the first Black family in that area. And then also living in Nairobi and Mombasa, Kenya. Family lived in Addis Ababa. So there's an intersectionality here that which I carry. And my mother was walking through our neighborhood in Arbondale, and a neighbor, was walking over to my mother to congratulate her. And she said to my mom, "Ah, look at your child, her eyes. You can tell she's been here before. There's something special about her." And not to say that when we look at children, they're not special, but there's an energy that I believe that the healer who is here to bring their healing to this earth has within themselves from the time that they're born. Some of us, it lays dormant. So you may not see it in those eyes as a child, but maybe you see it as a young person or an elder. Whatever it may be, we all have that special capability to heal. It's just awakening it is where we might find ourselves paying more attention to. And that's also my work. So I awaken individuals, no matter what sphere they may come from, to see that they too are their healer.
Listening and being heard is really part of the healing process.
It is. It is.
And narrative medicine, I think, was intended to help physicians listen more closely about how patients represent themselves. But there's a problem in Western medicine with the amount of time that physicians have with patients. And so they get right
Yes,
down to the problem
yes,
and perhaps ignore the story.
yes.
How do you try to rectify that situation?
Well, when I'm speaking to those who are going to soon be clinicians and physicians, and I'm thinking of my students,
Mhm.
I teach a class in spirituality and health. Presence is really one of the key tenets to being able to listen to a patient, especially when there's, let's say, 7 minutes that you might have with them. So that presence can happen instantaneously when you look at someone in the eyes, and maybe it's just that one question, how are you? Now, the patient could probably go on for many, many minutes of how are you? When you are present, there is something that happens when you know that you are listening to the patient by asking that question of how are you. You can easily, if you are present with that person, just with your presence, just with your eyes, can shift the conversation to what it really needs to be, which is about one's health. And I will add well-being. The well-being part, doctors and clinicians are not taught that in medical school. So I think what's really unique about Colombia is that we are opening up a space, a not even a space, we're opening up the opportunity to teach and share how one can be present. And when we're present, we're bringing in empathy. We're bringing in social justice. We're bringing in ideas to help the patient beyond their medical history because we're listening to them. So if you only have 7 minutes or 5 minutes, I would suggest put away that chart for a moment or even prepare yourself if you can with the chart. Now, again, I understand time is of essence. Maybe they didn't have time to look at the chart, but just being present, even the touch of someone's body. I remember not too long ago, a few years ago, I was having issues with my lungs and it just felt off. My body felt off. And like I said, I am not fearful of Western doctoring. So when I felt that it was time to receive a second opinion, meaning the first is me attuning to my body and working within the energy system and all of the things that which I know to do, I went to the doctor. The doctor didn't touch me. She didn't look at me in the eyes. She was at that computer station, the doc, and just like writing up whatever she was writing up. And I know all that I know, everything I'm sharing here. I know all of this. I allowed myself to leave the room without feeling held or without feeling taken care of. And I remember going out and saying, wait, what just happened here? It was a whirlwind. And so I went to the front desk and I said, I need to speak to the doctor again. And they said, oh, well, she's in with another patient. I said, that's fine. I will wait. I could not leave that doctor's office without letting know that doctor how I felt and how she was doing a disservice not only to me, but to herself. And she appreciated that. And what she did was asked me, what would I like to have happen? And I said, can you just feel my chest? Can you feel my lungs? I just want to know that maybe you feel something that which you don't think could be what the cause is. And because I went back and because then I felt open to let her know how I needed to do this, especially since I am a facilitator and an educator of narrative medicine, I couldn't leave without understanding what I was missing. So I also believe that we need to be advocates. Patients need to advocate for themselves. Now, did it change the diagnosis? No, it didn't, but it changed how I felt. And it changed how I would decide whether or not to see that clinician, physician again. So we're charged here in different levels to really embolden the patient to be their advocate, but then how do we embolden the patient to become their own advocate? And then we're here to charge the clinician, the doctor, to be an advocate for the patient and to be present with the patient. How do we do that? All of that is deep listening. I deeply listened to myself, my intuition, and said, nope, this is not right. And I work in a way that I could afford to wait. But many of us can't afford to wait. Many of us can't afford to say, I need to see the doctor again because I'm dissatisfied. Well, all of that creates blockage in the system, right? I know that I became a block in their system for the day because now she needed to find time to see me again. So what do we do? Well, that's when I think we all need to come together from different areas of the medical healthcare industry to figure it out because I don't have the answer. I don't say that I have the answer. I just know I have part of the answer.
One of the things I'm fascinated by what you said was that your first opinion comes from you, not the first doctor, but you. You are your primary consultant. You know your body
Yes.
better than anyone.
Yes.
And then the second is the actual physician. And so it really does, change the dynamics in a significant way. But also, you made me think about the how doctors are trained in Western medicine. I really have doubts that empathy can be taught in a course. Um,
Agree.
one of the issues I think with physicians is that they haven't experienced empathy in terms of their own training. Um, like you want you'd really like the doctor to say, how are you doing, and really mean it and to be genuinely curious. I'm not sure that medical students get that from
I'm gonna
preceptors.
disagree.
Okay, please.
And why I disagree is because in my class, I bring the presence of attuning to oneself through the breath. So one of the important parts about my class is coming in and arriving. And that arrival is really the practice of being present in one's body. Sometimes we might just take a deep breath and exhale out and feel the body settling into the room, into the chair. That practice in itself, when it's ritualized, I know that my students are perhaps even yearning for those moments, right? And so what we are offering them in the teachings is to learn how to create ritual within themselves, right? Many of them have, connection to religious rituals. They have connection to um, a culture that teaches them to be ritualized in their practice, and I am asking them to afford their curiosity to open up into what is their ritual that they practice before they see a patient. And so they are practicing to become clinicians and doctors and public health researchers and community leaders. And they are to practice a ritual that gives them the support system that they need in order to bring out their empathy, to see the other, that patient, that community leader, as someone to deeply listen to. So that's why I say, yes, I actually do believe that we can teach our soon to be clinicians and doctors this, because if we attune to the power of ritual, they're learning ritual, right? They're the studying of all of the science and the studying of ways in which to suture and all the different studying that they have to do, they're ritualized in it, right? They have to practice and practice and practice. Well, I'm saying practice being present with oneself, which we are calling a spiritual practice. And maybe that practice, again, is to look out the window and take a deep breath in and exhale out, to feel the body, to feel the heart beating, to maybe even set an intention for why you want to be present with your student, with your patient, with your family member. So if we make that normal for our students to practice ritual and being present with themselves, we'll have better doctoring in this country.
Well, yeah, that was my point. It wasn't that it's not possible, but it's not widely practiced. What you're talking about, helping students uh, learn to be present with their patients, even if it's for a brief moment in time. I just don't see a lot of that in medical education. So, but you're bringing up something I think that um, is really the idea of how do you teach empathy? It's by being empathic to another person. And if med students had hundreds of examples, hundreds of times where their preceptors were actually listening to them, genuinely curious about why they did what they did, rather than simply correct them. Often medicine, you make a mistake, you get corrected, and you feel bad. You're not really listened to very closely, but I understand, I think what you're saying is the way to engender empathy in physicians is by being empathic with them.
Yeah,
We talk a lot about empathy towards patients. We don't talk a lot about empathy towards med students or people in the healthcare world. It's brutal, as you
it
know.
really is. It really is. And you bring a major point, the teaching. So our curriculum needs to be changed, right? Again, I don't have the full answers here, but those who have access to, the curriculum that these medical students are, engaging in and immersing in, we have to find a change, right? And I think, you know, or I believe, unfortunately, there will be more students experiencing the anxiety, being and feeling discouraged, the high rate of suicide amongst physicians will continue to rise until we actually decide to do things differently.
And also, as you're doing, integrating a number of different healthcare practices that are ancient and
Yes,
have been rejected, I think, in the Western curriculum, because they're old, they're not based in the science revolution. Um, but you're really bringing back in many ways, I think, what's been lost,
yes.
and perhaps what's being practiced elsewhere, but not necessarily here. So it's
Right,
important. So you're bringing
right.
the world into your teaching. Your mom was a Pan Am flight attendant.
Yes,
You've seen the world, so it's fascinating that your very birth and being has been global from the very beginning. You you
yes.
you were you were born to bring in these different messages, these different ideas and spiritual practices into healthcare. And I'm also fascinated by what you're saying about the spiritual nature of narrative.
Well, I now will speak to storyteller in me.
Hmm.
My father came to the United States as a musician. He came, studied at New England Conservatory, yet his goal was to go back home to his country and lead it. And in his music, he was reciting his album is in his native tongue of Uganda. And when you listen to it, and I've asked aunties and uncles to translate certain songs, they are they're parables, they're proverbs, they're his experiences of being a young person in Katwe, Uganda, and being this musician and wanting to see and travel the world. And he got that opportunity. And through that, he and education, he was able to return home to his country. And he's a former ambassador, retired now, yet understood the importance of being connected to the soil and the stories that the soil teaches one. And now he's a farmer. My family has a resort eco village that all of the trees that are on the property are medicinal trees. Some trees help prostate cancer, some trees help breast cancer, some trees help eczema, some trees help bronchitis. He understood that the stories that we live inside of us, but yet they need to be shared with the world. And so, from my mother, from my father, bringing those two entities together inside of me and my siblings, we are given an opportunity really to kind of pick and choose how we're going to enter and be of this world in this global society that we have been asked to, before we came into this world, to share. We've been asked to share these stories. And parts of African culture, you know, elders, they don't say, don't do this. They give you some saying that you have to sit there and be like, the heck are they talking about? I remember being with my jaja. That's the word for grandmother and grandfather. And they would sit, and my jaja Nalongo, which is grandmother, she didn't speak very much English, if at all, any English. So we spoke with our eyes and with our smiles. And I, I well, when I was a little girl, I could understand a little bit of Luganda, but I understood when she was trying to tell me something really important. She would bring me in. She was a nice woman, big woman, she just had these arms that just would bring you in. So she would, when she needed to tell me something, she would bring me in. I could feel her heartbeat. I could feel the intonation of her voice, and also feel, I can smell her, and I could feel the breath. That's what I'm trying to say, the breath. And there's energy with all of that that would tell me, oh, you need to deeply listen. And the beauty about the work that I do is to bring us back to our tongue. And the tongue is our indigenous tongue. Whether you are from Africa or Ireland or Newton, Massachusetts, we all have a tongue. And so that tongue, when we listen deeply to it, we are given information. It just happens. It absorbs into the molecules. It's called epigenetics. It's there. It's being a part of the world and deeply, again, listening. So I knew that there was knowledge, there was information that I wanted to just tap into.
Yeah, your work is deeply sensual as well. Like
Yes,
just the way that you described it. Feeling someone's presence, watching them, looking at them, smelling them, taking them in, feeling their warmth, having them touch you. It's it's deeply sensual, and it just brings me back to that anecdote that you talked about when you visited the doctor and you simply wanted her to touch you and feel you. In other words, your examination isn't over until you actually experience me and my body as a person. That seems
yes,
to be really important.
it is. And that's an important piece of narrative practice, right? Is to see the person as a whole person,
Right.
right? Not just their diagnosis, right? Not just by how they look and how they appear to you. You must touch, you must sense them, right? You must do these things, interact with the whole body,
Right.
which then allows us to interact with one's mind, to connect to their essence. Yourself. See, that's the beautiful thing about spiritual practice as well. You want to get curious, you want to use your imagination. So, what if we were to teach adults to go back to their childlike selves and use their imagination? That's why children are just so wonderful because they're able to jump into this place of imagination and they start to create worlds that they truly believe they're a part of. And I have seen children say to me, no, I am a princess. No, I am a king. No, I am a scientist of, the little fractal, you know, things in the world, and I know what they all mean. You can't tell them anything different because they have used their imagination and they firmly believe within themselves that this is who they are. And this person, again, who might say, what are they talking about? Use your imagination. Imagine, pretend that you actually had a day that was challenging, but you are walking into a safe place that you are going to be comforted and loved and supported. You're going to be able to laugh and just be yourself when you walk through that door. When you cross over the threshold, that's what it's going to be. Pretend, throw it out there. Just throw it out there, throw it out into your mind. Again, I would say that your whole penny, that your experience would be a lot different.
Yeah, that's right. Be the person that you imagine yourself to be. And from that will then come a different kind of relationship, perhaps with people that you're working
And
with
yourself. And
and
yourself.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I just want to really thank you for this conversation and
Thank you.
hope to hear more about your work as well.
Well, the work is really expanding, and I'm really excited to capture stories of care spaces that have been supportive, that have created innovative ways to make their patients feel supported, heard, and seen. So you will start to see more of these stories come to life as I would like to highlight them. And I think that's really important. So we can start to gather data of different hospitals and clinicians and private practices, doctors themselves who are doing healthcare right, who actually find that um, making the patient and their staff feel that they're doing something really great for their community. And those stories are out there. So that is the work of Narrative Bridge now in 2025 as we launch our YouTube channel called The Quantum Bridge. So please do tune into that in the next couple of months as we start to gather these stories.